Chapter 1. The Birth of a Ghost. May 21, 1941. Naples. Fura Grotta. The air is thick with the scent of dust and baked stone, the sun barely penetrating the smog that clings to the narrow streets. Behind what would one day become the imposing San Paolo Stadium, a small, humble house stands, its walls scarred by years of neglect. In that house, a baby cries for the first time. His name is Umberto Ammaturo. At that moment, no one could have imagined that this child, born into the struggles of working-class Naples, would grow to become one of the most elusive, feared, and enigmatic figures in the annals of Italian organized crime. The streets of Fura Grotta are alive with movement. Children run barefoot, dodging carts and stray dogs, their laughter mingling with the shouts of street vendors. In this chaotic symphony, young Umberto's life begins, not in comfort or safety, but in survival. His mother dies when he is 7, leaving his father to raise 6 children alone. The winery that once promised stability is now a daily battle. Hunger gnaws at the family, but it also teaches resilience. Umberto learns early that life is a game of observation, patience, and action. By the age of 14, the streets have become his classroom. Petty thefts, smuggling minor goods, running errands that skirt the law, each act sharpens his mind, hones his instincts. The Falangari juvenile prison becomes his first formal education in crime. Here, he observes older prisoners, men hardened by years of survival, and learns the first unspoken rules of the underground world. These are the crucibles where the Camorra forges its future leaders, yet Umberto is different. He does not shout, he does not threaten. He watches, assesses, and strikes with precision. The 1950s in Naples are a time of clandestine opportunity. American cigarettes, coffee, penicillin, smuggled goods flow through the ports, and young men like Ammaturo seize the chance. By adulthood, petty theft evolves into extortion, and then, with the help of minor traffickers and seafarers, into organized smuggling at the port of Santa Lucia. But ambition burns brighter than mere survival. Umberto is not content to follow. He wants to shape, to command, to orchestrate. He earns a reputation. By 1962, at 21, he is already known as O Pazzo, the Crazy One. A nickname earned not for senseless violence, but for his unpredictable, calculated behavior. Court records later reveal that he has a ferocity few can comprehend. He would strangle his victims with wire, 15 known murders attributed to his hands, a signature as cold as it is intimate. Violence is a tool, not a performance. While Naples' criminal landscape fractures in neighborhood feuds, Ammaturo operates as an anomaly. He pledges no allegiance to any clan, yet maintains connections with names like Michele Zaza, Antonio Bardolino, and the Nuvolettas of Murano. Always a broker, never a subordinate, he perceives the world beyond petty territorial disputes. Cocaine, at the time still an emerging commodity, captures his imagination. To acquire it, he must look farther, beyond Italy to South America, to Peru, to Lima. The 1970s mark a turning point. Arrested in 1974 and 1977 for international drug trafficking, he learns the importance of deception and leverage. Criminologist Aldo Semerari and his colleague Antonio Motola become unwitting instruments in Ammaturo's strategy. By feigning psychiatric disorders, he gains entry to Aversa and later Naples psychiatric facilities. Semerari, a member of the notorious P2 Masonic Lodge, linked to right-wing subversive groups, provides assessments that unwittingly grant Ammaturo freedom to maneuver. By 1976, he escapes once again, an elusive ghost slipping through the fingers of authority. Meanwhile, in Naples, the old smuggling Camorra faces the rising force of Rafael Cutillo's new organized Camorra. Ammaturo observes, waits, and understands that a new war is imminent. But he does not participate as a soldier. He is a strategist, an architect operating from the shadows. In 1979, Cutillo's ambition to centralize power triggers a coalition of historic clans, the New Family, uniting under figures like Carmine Alfieri, Michele Zaza, Antonio Bardolino, the Nuvolettas, and Ammaturo. He brings 3 things more valuable than soldiers: capital, international relations, and reputation. While he keeps a low profile publicly, his influence is immense. He finances wars, provides men and resources, and orchestrates attacks, such as the car bomb near Cutillo's villa in 1981. a statement of intent and power, subtle yet devastating. In his personal life, chaos mirrors the streets. In 1965, he meets Assunta Puppetta Maresca, a legendary figure in Neapolitan crime. Their relationship is a storm of passion, mistrust, and violence. Twins Roberto and Antonella are born from this union, while Puppetta's son from a previous marriage, Pasqualino, disappears mysteriously in 1974. Rumors swirl of mafia revenge, family conflicts, or accidental death. The mystery never resolves. For Puppetta, it is an unhealed wound. For Ammaturo, an ambiguous stain. Amidst the feuds and wars of the 1980s, Ammaturo turns his eyes abroad. He understands that real wealth is now found in international cocaine networks, not in local markets. Peru becomes his base, Madrid his hub. He deals directly with Andean producers, bypassing intermediaries, moving shipments through Africa, Europe, and Italy with unprecedented sophistication. The DEA and Interpol soon recognize him as a key figure, one of Europe's most dangerous fugitives. Despite growing power, isolation follows. With the death of Antonio Bardolino in 1988, Ammaturo cuts ties with Naples, becomes a ghost moving across continents. Madrid, Casablanca, Lima, Sao Paulo, without leaving a trace. He is mythologized, some believing him dead, others claiming secret services protect him. Yet he remains operational, calculating, invisible. By 1993, after years of pursuit, Peruvian authorities arrest him in a villa in Surco. Alone, under a false identity, he surrenders quietly. In his possession are port maps, encrypted numbers, cash, and satellite phones, the keys to his global empire. Months of collaboration between the DEA, Interpol, ROS, and Naples' anti-mafia directorate culminate in capturing the ghost alive. But the story does not end. Ammaturo cooperates with justice, not with repentance, but with precision. He reveals structures, alliances, and logistics of international trafficking. He confesses 15 murders, including the brutal killing of Aldo Semerari in 1982, detailing the mechanisms of control and strategy that have allowed him to operate in the shadows for decades. Umberto Ammaturo's legacy is one of intelligence, ruthlessness, and unparalleled foresight. A predator who never needed an army, a broker who never required territory, a man whose life anticipated the models of modern transnational organized crime. Invisible yet omnipresent, feared yet little known, his story is a journey into the dark corridors of human ambition, power, and survival. Chapter 2: Shadows Across Continents. The late 1980s in Naples were a city of ghosts. The streets, once chaotic with life, now whispered secrets of power and betrayal. Ammaturo no longer walked these streets. Naples had become a theater of observation, a chessboard he would not enter directly. From his hideouts in Madrid, Lima, and Casablanca, he orchestrated a silent empire, one that spanned continents but remained invisible. He had learned the art of disappearance. A new identity for each city, forged documents, and a network of trusted intermediaries allowed him to slip through borders and authorities with surgical precision. In Lima, the sun painted the red clay streets gold, and the Andean mountains loomed like silent sentinels over the city. Here, Ammaturo negotiated with local producers, not as a buyer, but as an architect of entire supply chains. Each transaction, each shipment, was meticulously planned, hidden in containers, disguised among legitimate goods, using corrupt officials and the cover of legitimate business. Madrid became his financial hub. From a discreet apartment overlooking the bustling port, he monitored European networks. Telephone lines encrypted, couriers invisible in plain sight, shipments coordinated with precision that rivaled multinational corporations. He had transformed the crime of old into a business of shadows and calculation. But Ammaturo's life was not only logistics and profit. Isolation carried its own weight. Nights were long, sleepless, filled with the echoes of a past that refused to stay buried. Memories of Furagrata, of Pupetta's anger, of the missing Pasqualino, haunted him. He often wandered through the streets of Lima at night, cloaked in the anonymity of darkness, listening to the distant cries of the city, imagining the lives disrupted by his decisions. Death had been his companion, but loneliness was a constant reminder of the cost of power. In Madrid, a letter arrived that would alter his path. Antonio Bardolino, his last stable ally, had been killed in Brazil by Mario Iovine. A calculated assassination, eliminating obstacles and reshaping power dynamics. Ammaturo's response was calm, almost clinical. He cut contact with Campania entirely. Naples was no longer a field of opportunity. It was a dangerous glare, too bright for a man who thrived in shadows. Yet, power and ambition are never content with stillness. Ammaturo saw the emerging markets of Africa and Asia as extensions of his enterprise. Casablanca's ports, Panama's free trade zones, São Paulo's industrial districts, all became nodes in a vast network of influence. Each move was calculated, each connection measured, a web of control that few could perceive. He dealt with entire criminal ecosystems as one might manage a global corporation, understanding supply, demand, and leverage in ways his contemporaries could not. During this period, Ammaturo's personal life remained a complex labyrinth. Puppetta, once a storm of passion and vengeance, became a distant figure, yet her shadow lingered. Letters, sporadic meetings, brief flashes of shared history reminded him that even a ghost cannot escape the human attachments that anchor memory. The mystery of Pasqualino's disappearance remained a silent accusation, a wound that neither time nor distance could heal. Rumors persisted. Some whispered that Ammaturo had eliminated the boy, others suggested accident or mismanagement, but truth was elusive. He neither confirmed nor denied. He existed in ambiguity, a man shaped as much by secrets as by actions. By the early 1990s, law enforcement had intensified efforts to trace him. European and South American authorities collaborated, creating dossiers, monitoring transactions, triangulating movements. Ammaturo, however, anticipated each maneuver. He adapted quickly, changing safe houses, switching aliases, altering shipping routes, using psychological tactics to mislead pursuers. He had become not merely a fugitive but a specter of criminal ingenuity, a strategist who understood that survival required foresight beyond instinct. His empire, vast and invisible, began to attract attention from even larger criminal organizations. The Sicilian Mafia, interested in his cocaine supply, approached through intermediaries. Connections with Colombian and Peruvian cartels solidified. Ammaturo became a bridge between continents, a broker whose decisions could shift markets, redistribute power, and redefine alliances. Money flowed through his hands, yet he remained unseen, a phantom presence behind the transactions. During this time, Ammaturo reflected on the nature of power and mortality. He had witnessed countless betrayals, calculated killings, and the fragility of alliances. He understood that life was a balance between visibility and invisibility. To be too present was to be vulnerable, to be absent entirely risked irrelevance. He perfected the art of controlled appearance, revealing just enough influence to maintain authority while avoiding exposure. It was in this context that Ammaturo's legacy began to crystallize, not through fear alone, but through structure. While traditional Camorra clans relied on territorial dominance, Ammaturo's network functioned as a fluid, adaptive organism. Contracts were enforced not through the presence of armed men, but through the leverage of intelligence, economic control, and the omnipresent threat of retaliation. His was a system of ghostly dominion, one where absence amplified authority, and movement became a weapon as lethal as any gun or wire. Yet even in mastery, uncertainty lingered. Each shipment carried risk. Each new contact could be a double agent. Each city harbored hidden eyes. Ammaturo lived in a constant state of calculated tension, a predator aware that the hunt was eternal, that the world of shadows was as dangerous as it was profitable. By 1993, the net closed. A tip placed him in a villa in Surco, Lima. Peruvian authorities, coordinated with Interpol, DEA, and Italian forces, prepared an operation. Ammaturo, living under a false identity, was caught not in a shootout but quietly, almost respectfully. Alone, he surrendered, possessing the maps, codes, and tools of his empire. It was the capture of a ghost whose influence had spanned continents, reshaping the dynamics of organized crime without ever revealing his full hand. What followed was unprecedented. Cooperation without repentance. Ammaturo, precise and unwavering, began to reveal the architecture of his operations. He described international cocaine routes, financial networks, and the hidden alliances that had allowed him to operate unseen. He admitted to murders, conspiracies, and logistical strategies, not for absolution, but for the record. Magistrates described him as reliable, methodical, and extraordinarily lucid. Through these revelations, Ammaturo's story transforms from that of a fugitive to a case study in power, strategy, and human psychology. He becomes both subject and architect of his own myth, a man whose life offers insight into the evolution of modern organized crime. From the streets of Fuerteventura to the ports of Lima, he illustrates the transition from territorial dominance to transnational networks, from brute force to ghostly authority. Chapter 3: The Ghost's Reckoning. The capture of Umberto Ammaturo in Lima was not the end of a story. It was the beginning of a transformation. For decades, he had moved like a shadow across continents, untouchable, invisible, a master of logistics, deception, and calculated terror. Now, under the harsh fluorescent lights of Peruvian custody, the predator became a witness. He had entered the world as a boy in the dusty streets of Fuerteventura, witnessing poverty, loss, and the fragile boundaries between survival and lawlessness. Now, decades later, he was at the center of the same forces he had once skirted and manipulated. Yet, unlike the boys who had once followed orders, Ammaturo had never needed to submit. He had learned to survive by anticipating, by controlling information, and by remaining unseen. From the first day in custody, he began speaking. Magistrates and investigators listened, pen in hand, sometimes incredulous. Ammaturo described the inner workings of the Camorra not as an observer, but as a designer. He spoke of the new family, of alliances formed and broken, of clandestine shipments of cocaine from Peru to Europe. He revealed the delicate balance between Naples, Madrid, and Lima, each city a node in a vast, unseen network. Every word he spoke carried weight. Names, dates, financial flows, routes, codes, and mechanisms. Ammaturo delivered them with calm precision. No dramatics, no remorse, only facts. He described killings, conspiracies, betrayals. He admitted responsibility for around 15 murders, most carried out with a cold intimacy of wire strangulation, a method that became his hallmark. The magistrates noted his clarity, the lack of embellishment, and the eerie lucidity of a man who had lived in darkness for decades. Yet the story of Ammaturo was never simply about crime. It was about power, isolation, and the cost of absolute control. In the quiet of his cell, he reflected on the paradox of visibility. Too much, and one becomes vulnerable. Too little, and one loses influence. For 30 years, he had existed in the delicate equilibrium between presence and absence, a ghost whose authority was felt without ever being seen. The international consequences of his confessions were immediate. Hundreds of arrests followed. Investigations in Italy, Spain, and South America unveiled networks that had previously seemed impenetrable. Clans that had relied on his services were destabilized. The balance of power in Naples shifted. What was invisible had become visible, and Ammaturo's decisions had rewritten the rules of organized crime. But even in cooperation, he remained enigmatic. He did not seek glory, nor did he express remorse. He was neither repentant nor hero. He was a man who understood that truth, once revealed, had its own consequences. He spoke of Aldo Semerari's murder, of the intricacies of the psychiatric manipulations, of double crosses among allies. Each revelation was precise, measured, delivered with the cold efficiency of a mind accustomed to planning decades ahead. The magistrates were struck by the paradox. A man capable of unspeakable violence, yet capable of articulating, in detail, the logic and structures behind his actions. Ammaturo became a teacher in a sense, a living manual for understanding the transformation of criminal systems from territorial feuds to transnational networks. Outside, Naples remained oblivious. Streets hummed with life, unaware that the ghost who had orchestrated power and terror from afar now resided behind bars, speaking the hidden history of their city. In Lima, Madrid, and Casablanca, his former contacts scrambled to adapt, unsure of who could be trusted, uncertain of what would emerge from the veil of secrecy he had maintained for so long. The psychological tension in Ammaturo's narrative is as compelling as the criminal acts themselves. He described his own isolation, the constant vigilance required to survive, the necessity of suspicion, and the relentless calculation of risk. Relationships were always strategic. Affection, when it existed, was measured against loyalty and discretion. His bond with Puppetta, filled with passion, betrayal, and unresolved grief over Pasqualino, became a recurring shadow, a reminder that even a ghost cannot entirely escape the human cost of choices. As he spoke, the magistrates pieced together a panorama of global crime. Routes from Lima to Naples, connections in Panama and Casablanca, and financial networks spanning continents. Ammaturo revealed not only the logistics but the philosophy behind it, the understanding that modern crime was a system, not simply a collection of men. The insight reshaped Italian law enforcement approaches, emphasizing intelligence, surveillance, and understanding networks over mere brute force. Despite the revelations, one mystery remained. Pasqualino Simonetti, the boy whose disappearance had haunted Ammaturo's past, remained unaccounted for. Ammaturo claimed ignorance, stating he did not know what had happened. Some collaborators whispered suspicions. Others insisted it was an accident or a consequence of a chaotic family conflict. Yet the shadow of the missing boy lingered, an emblem of ambiguity, guilt, and the limits of human control. In prison, Ammaturo's life settled into rhythm, yet he remained a figure of intrigue. Interviews were rare, statements carefully measured. Scholars, journalists, and law enforcement agents studied him as an anomaly, a man who had operated without allegiance, territory, or conventional structure. His name appeared in dossiers, books, and reports, yet public consciousness barely recognized him. He was a ghost in history, present in influence but absent in perception. By the mid-1990s, Ammaturo had provided sufficient evidence for major convictions, destabilizing networks and reshaping power structures. He received a 29-year sentence for 19 murders and 4 attempted murders, yet his cooperation had the effect of creating ripples far beyond the prison walls. Organized crime in Naples had changed. The methods he had pioneered, network-based logistics, international brokerage, clandestine communication, would define criminal enterprises for decades to come. The final chapters of Ammaturo's life remain largely hidden. Under protective custody, likely abroad, he exists removed from the public eye. His identity changed, life reconstructed, the ghost now living among the living in anonymity. He remains a subject of study, a cautionary tale, and a testament to the interplay between intelligence, ruthlessness, and invisibility. Ammaturo's story is not a moral tale. It offers no redemption, no poetic justice. It is a narrative of survival, calculation, and the exercise of power in its most distilled form. It is a lesson in how a single individual, unbound by convention or allegiance, can shape history from the shadows, manipulate empires, and leave an indelible mark without ever commanding armies or territories. His legacy is structural, intellectual, and ghostly. He predicted the evolution of organized crime, anticipated the mechanisms of global trafficking, and exemplified the potential of the human mind when honed by circumstance and necessity. The man who began as a delivery boy in Furagrada became a symbol of criminal ingenuity, a phantom whose decisions resonated across continents, and whose story remains both extraordinary and chilling. In the quiet of protective custody, Ammaturo lives on, unseen yet remembered. His life reminds us that power does not always shout. Sometimes it whispers, moves silently, and endures through calculated absence. The ghost of Naples, the architect of shadow empires, exists not in headlines, not in folklore, but in the structure of modern crime itself, a complex, unsettling monument to the potential of human intelligence, ruthlessness, and the enduring weight of secrecy.